This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
It was March 30th, 1988, when a very early Tim Burton introduced us to memorable demonic character of Beetlejuice, played by Michael Keaton, and a recently deceased couple, Adam and Barbara, played by Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis, who find themselves trapped in their quaint New England home as ghosts after a freak car accident. An eccentric family from New York, the Deetzes, move in and begins renovating the house. In their attempts to scare away the Deetzes, they befriend their teenage daughter, Lydia, played by Winona Ryder. When all attempts to scare the Deetzes have failed, out of desperation, they unwittingly summon Beetlejuice, a mischievous, meddlesome, and obnoxious bioexorcist ghost. Chaos ensues as Beetlejuice wreaks havoc on the Deetzes. Among the chaos, Adam and Barbara must navigate the afterlife bureaucracy while trying to protect both the living and the dead from Beetlejuice's trickster schemes. In the end, they must find a way to outsmart Beetlejuice and restore order to their haunted home. Was our host with the most Beetlejuice character too much with our two critics, or did it hit the right cinematic notes? We're about to find out on This Week as we cover 1988's Beetlejuice on Back to the Balcony.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony.
So I think you saw this one coming in our first season, Antonio, because with the release of the sequel, it was inevitable, and I had to put this one on here just like we did with Ghostbusters. This one, I think, growing up in the 80s, you couldn't not see Beetlejuice, and even into the 90s. This is one that I didn't see in the theater, and I remember it took a while to see it on video because the video rental place, Blockbuster, Crazy Mike's Video, whatever it may be, was always sold out of this one. And this one, for me, when that video cassette came home and I finally got to watch it, it added to the experience of this, really testing the PG rating on how we were going to respond to it as kids, to teenagers, to adults. So to me, that just getting my hands on this video cassette added to the experience of it. And by the end of it, it was unsettling, it was scary to some extent, but it was enticing, it was interesting, it was funny, and it was hard not to look away from this movie. And since that viewing, this movie has been kind of a rewatch almost every year for me, because even today, this movie still wows me when it comes to visual storytelling, performances, and just the overall set designs and cinematic score. To me, this one, and we'll hear our critics say it, is the most ambitious movie, and I will go on record, and you might have some disagreements, but this one to me is one of the most ambitious movies of the 80s, if not 70s. And even today, you will not find storytelling like this that we saw from Tim Burton's Beetlejuice. What are your thoughts?
I mean, this is going to be a hard episode, man, because...
Oh, no.
Well, no. Hard episode in the fact that I've got no negative notes on this movie, really. I don't. And, I mean, I didn't see this in the theater either. This was definitely like wait for home video release, and as soon as you can get it, you watch it. It's so funny because I saw Pee-wee's Big Adventure in the theater, but I didn't see this one. I think that was my parents just not knowing what it was. And that might have been the issue when it came out, is people did not know what it was. And it's hard to call it a cult film because, like Rocky Horror Picture Show, it's gone beyond its cult status now. It is, absolutely monumental in its placement in film history when it comes to, creating the Tim Burton aesthetic that we all know and love now, to the Danny Elfman score, to, having its animated series. It just went beyond, I think, what its expectations of being a paranormal, ghosty, cult comedy were going to be. I don't know anybody that does not like this movie. Like, I don't. So when we get to the reviews, it's going to be very interesting to have that kind of conversation on how they were not on board the fun train of Beetlejuice, because it wasn't just kids, it was adults and kids. I mean, my parents liked it because for them, it was like the modern day version of Rocky Horror Picture Show, right? It's like, what the hell am I watching? And what is this movie? And who is this character? It garnished a lot of, reaction the same way that Rocky Horror did. Maybe not the midnight showings, but definitely like this was not a mainstream movie per se, as it was an experiment in the art and the creativity that Tim Burton was going to bring us for the next 40 years.
Yeah, and you touched on it too. This is the type of movie that when it hit theaters, the marketing, we're not sure what kind of movie this was. And even to an extent, when watching it on video cassette, we still don't know what kind of movie this really was or who it was targeted for, what audience it was made for. Because again, this one was a push PG rating. And to me, this was in my opinion, was a really pushed PG rating on a lot of the content on here. But to me, that's the magic of it, is really pushing the limits. And this is why I treasure this movie so much, because I've said it before on my show, is you have how many filmmakers and how many behind the scenes people are working on this movie, that they're green. This is some of their first projects.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine anybody with experience not getting into this movie and almost wrecking the vision that these filmmakers do, because this is a type of movie that's so unique and so risky that the only ones I think that can really pull it off are these green and these really fresh filmmakers with fresh ideas. So from Danny Elfman to Tim Burton to the writers, even the set design that uh, from, I believe it's Catherine Mann and Tom Duffield, that do a fantastic job with just the overall look. These are all brand new, fresh filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't tell me that this one had a lot of studio meddling in it, because there's no way this movie would have been what it was if we had a lot of studio meddling in it. They just let these filmmakers flow their creative juices and just go with it. And that's what makes this movie, to me, really unique to where we stand going into the future of filmmaking.
Well, I got to talk about like the production crew behind it, because this is a Geffen film, and Geffen lost his shirt on Little Shop of Horrors, and he was one of the original producers of the off-Broadway show, and its notoriety kind of helped him get into being a producer on stage and being a production company for film. So his roots are in avant-garde and offbeat. And so this is like perfect. And even though Beetlejuice is not a musical, it kind of feels like one. We have the calypso music theme all throughout the movie. We essentially get 2, maybe 3 lip-synced musical numbers in the film. So there definitely is kind of like an offbeat musical aesthetic. And of course, most of us know by now it got an Broadway rendition of it too that was very successful, and it's a lot of fun. Pee-wee's Big Adventure was a hit, but it was still more of a cult hit than it was a mainstream hit. Mostly people were watching it because of Pee Wee Herman, not Tim Burton, but it did show them that Tim Burton could make a movie. And before he could get his Batman, this was the movie that was going to say that I can do something different, something special, and it really is what kind of pushed him into the director's chair for Batman, saying that this is going to be something different. There's a dark whimsy to it. There's a gothic feel to it. There's an appreciation of cinema past to it. But also, there's a lot of slapstick comedy that's very reminiscent of a Marx Brothers routine, right? Like, essentially, Beetlejuice is a paranormal, demonic version of, an old hacky comic of the olden days, whether it's like a Groucho Marx or a Benny Youngman or a Benny Goodman or Henny Youngman. Like, that's what it feels like. So there's also some throwbacks there that are fun to watch and fun to put together. But it's also a love story because we have Geena Davis and Alec Baldwin. Like, I think that's what makes this movie work, man, is that there are enough elements of cinema in this for different people to appreciate. There's the love story, there's the comedy, there's the paranoia, there's the horror. It really fills so many gaps, but it's very tricky in the way it does it. It's not too obvious. It does it in a way where it blends them all together so you feel like you're enjoying a full meal and not a bunch of side courses.
100%, because you have 4 to 5 different tones working with each and every set of characters here. And what really ties it together, I think, and I love that you brought it up, is the Danny Elfman score, because this is the movie that if you pay attention to the characters, the music works alongside the characters, and there's slight different tones when we switch to, say, the undead, to
Right.
the goth setting and all that. But the music follows in detail the characters, and that's where it really gains credibility, is the fact that we are so detailed to the fact of not only the set design, but the movements of our characters, that Danny Elfman really pays attention to how his music is affecting these characters and the overall feel of the movie. So without the score, and we've talked about it before, is how important music is to movies. Here is a prime example, because if you didn't have this score, it would be very hard to execute all these different tones going through these sets of characters. And I think that is one of, to me, Danny Elfman's strongest scores, and it's one of his earliest ones, because I think he really did pay attention to what these characters are doing and what he's seeing while he's composing on screen. So to me, the tone is very ambitious, and I think that's what really makes this movie for everybody, like you said, because there's a lot to take in, and you might not like the goth scene, but you might like the romance piece of it. I think it's perfectly well balanced on how it actually executes each and every character in their own tones.
I think it's also a testament to show that Tim Burton really is good at making anything feel like it's straight out of his brain. I mean, this wasn't his story, it wasn't his screenplay. The original screenplay, believe it or not, actually played more like a Ghostbusters or more like a classic horror comedy, like an Abbott and Costello meet the Frankenstein kind of thing. It's Burton's vision and aesthetic that really gives it the feel that it has, because otherwise it would have just been about a haunted house, about someone trying to. I mean, I think the way remember it being described in the original pitch was if it was Poltergeist but backwards, where instead of like ghosts trying to scare humans out, the humans were the ones that were annoying the ghosts. That's what they were trying to do with that story. And as it got developed, we get all these interesting characters like Juno, the worker, played by Sylvia Sidney. Fantastic role from her. The really interesting people who have been killed in a variety of ways. Like, you're in a world where if you die by natural causes, or let's say unnatural causes, but it wasn't you that was self-inflicting your death, then you are essentially stuck in this bookish bureaucratic agency where people who have committed suicide are forced to live the rest of their existence in supporting dead people in their transition to the afterlife. That's a very, very, very cool plot point and a very cool tapestry to weave on what the afterlife actually looks like. And sometimes I feel like Beetlejuice's short screen time and the urgency to get him into the scenes doesn't necessarily leave us as much time as we want to spend in the afterlife to see more interesting people, to see more of those interesting situations. I like that. If I had one complaint, I'd say there's not enough of that. Maybe we'll see more in the sequel. But what's cool is that the animated series took place mostly in the afterlife, and so I feel like that was the compensation for it. We got to see more of that. Essentially, where I'm going with this is the screenwriters had a very specific story, and I'm not going to necessarily say vision, but they had an idea of how and where they wanted to play the story. Does it work without the way that Tim Burton and Bo Welch and all the people that were doing the creative process with the art design, the set design, the makeup, and the costumes? When it becomes almost like a living cartoon, it becomes its own thing. It's no longer that script. It is the Beetlejuice movie. And when they talk about the ambitiousness of it, that's exactly what they're talking about. You're creating an afterlife in a world that we've never seen before, and you're actually making it look fun. You're making death look fun.
When we look at this movie, you can almost visualize, as they're doing the art direction, the set designs, almost saying, what if we did this? What if we did this? And we can see this script almost in development as they're shooting. And when we talk about the afterlife, this is the environment. This is the setting that really did for me make me uncomfortable. But what made it lighthearted was the actual characters. We take the first time we meet the caseworker, this really kind of stereotypical caseworker character, but as she's having conversation, you can feel the warmness to an extent of the understanding of death.
Mhm.
The characters here make that environment a lot less intimidating. We're seeing this dark place and this dark topic of death, and it could be so easy to go down the wrong path of just making this a terrifying environment with scary characters or creatures, if you will. But the characters really are smart when it comes to how they're presenting their lines and how it's actually written to show some sympathy towards the undead. And that's what really attracts us to this environment of curiosity of when we're visiting this world, where it takes us to this new environment. It's character driven, even though the visuals are stunning. You want to look at everything, and it unlocks your curiosity of wanting more from this. And that's what really makes this progression of where these characters are going to go interesting, because the visuals again are there to support the characters. And I think we're going to have some disagreements when we get into to the critics, because that's where I disagree with it. But the actual characters are the driving aspects of it, with the visuals really there to just give that exclamation mark on where these characters are going to go.
Yeah, I'm glad that you segued into that, because the next point that I was going to make is this movie also isn't what it is without its cast. Like, its cast is pitch perfect and everyone is doing exactly what they need to be doing. It feels so connected. The cohesiveness of this cast. Like, Catherine O'Hara is just the perfect counterbalance to Jeffrey Jones, right? He's like the neurotic, he's not necessarily a yuppie, but he's definitely a New York professional. And then she's like the crazy art house lady, right? Like, and she's also the second wife. She's the stepmom. It tells a story right there. You know, Lydia, who was almost Alyssa Milano, it came down to her and Winona Ryder, and they made the right decision, obviously, in my opinion. I think Alyssa Milano is just a little bit too cute to be that character. But I mean, she essentially created the goth movement of the 80s and 90s for females, for sure. You know, that perception of someone who's always in black and someone who's always writing death poetry and things like that. Hey, I'm a sucker for it, and it's because of this movie. But then, like, you've got Alec Baldwin playing one of the most normal roles he's ever done. Just a likable, good husband, you know, out in the country, owns a hardware store, wears flannel, right? Geena Davis wearing her house dress. I mean, these people are in their like late 20s, maybe early 30s, but they've already adjusted to a life that seems more fitting for people in their 50s, right? You know, she's cleaning house and he's making models in the attic. That makes their characters seem safe. So when Beetlejuice does show up, it really gives you this wild card of danger, but also like that seductive nature of what is this guy going to do next? He's so unpredictable. And that's what really, in that 14 minutes of screen time that Michael Keaton does, he doesn't have to be, and they're going to get an earful from me. He doesn't have to be the focal point of the story just because it's named after him. He is there to create chaos. You don't want 90 minutes of chaos. You want chaos to come when it's least expected, and that's what they do very well in the scenes that they bring him in. So, again, they cast the script, the production, the creativity behind it, and I'm going to say like the balls that Geffen had to put this out. It is just the perfect combination. It really is.
Well, you talk about chaos because we look at the conflicts. These characters are a conflict within a conflict, because the interesting fact of it is we have this obviously troubled family. We don't focus on it per se, but we do get obviously some good hints of it. We have the eccentric stepmother that doesn't go down the route of evil stepmother. We have the overall pushover nice guy dad, like you said. All these families are so subtly conflicted with each other, and then we get two different aspects going into this conflict that really does amplify where again these characters are going to go. And this is what makes these characters really interesting is how they're going to go up against this even bigger conflict when the chaos is already at home. You have the house being torn apart. You have the goth teenage daughter that's just dislike with the stepmother. So all of these conflicts are leading up to something that we do have a crescendo with. That is one of my biggest problems with the movie, that I will say, is how the last act does feel a little bloated and does feel a little rushed, where I really wish they actually had 15, 20 minutes in there to really build it a little bit more, because we get to that wedding scene and we get the big climatic sandworm coming in. And I do feel that's a little rushed when we didn't really lead up to it. It's kind of like a light switch, even though I loved the entire movie in its entirety. But I didn't like the last 15, 20 minutes when it comes to the execution of it, because it did need, to me, a little bit more to really tie some perfect bows on a lot of these other conflicts with the characters going into it. Because I think they left that untied. And who knows, we might get some more depth in dialogue leading up in the next one. I don't have my fingers crossed, but we'll see. But to me, that's where the problem really faults, is in that last act.
No, I agree with you on that. I think my viewpoint on that is I'm really just complacent about it. I could be one way or the other. And I think the reason why I feel that way is because there's so much unexplained in the movie. And I think it's an intentional unexplanation of things. Like, why do people go to Saturn? Why are there sandworms? How can the sandworms get into the real world? I don't care. I really don't. It is really just a part of the fun of this movie is that you don't have an explanation, and in a way you really don't need one. So I've tried in my entire youth trying to figure out what some of these moments mean and why they go to Saturn and stuff like that. Maybe it's in the script. I don't know. I've never read it, but it doesn't bother me because, again, like, the execution to me is what matters. If I had to say my least favorite part of the movie, it's not the end. I'd say the least favorite part of the movie for me is mostly like the beginning. Like, I think it does take a little bit too long to get to where we want to go with these people. I think it's too long of them sitting around the house and waiting for, Catherine O'Hara to do something crazy. But again, that's just picking hairs. It really is. Like, I have no notes to make this movie better. That's always been my thing with that, is I just want to get to the good stuff a little bit faster. But there's other people who will be like, oh no, I like to spend time with them before it goes to hell, you know? So it really is just subjective.
Well, it's building the curiosity. Again, movies don't need to hold your hands. I get it. This one, by the end of the movie, even though I had some problems with it, it doesn't make you walk out of this movie and say necessarily why, because it's already given you visuals, it's already given you some imagination, it's already given and earned the right to be ridiculous. Even though, like you said, we can nitpick at it, but at the same time, it's not going to make me judge this movie on the little things that it didn't explain, because that's the part that it really did make me wonder of the why years down the road. It makes me think about the movie. It made the movie stay with me to an extent, and I think that might have, of course, been a little bit of the intent, is to have that wonder of why. And whether they planned a sequel back then or not, I don't know. I didn't research that point, but if they didn't, I still think it's a very linear genius, to the point where it allows the audience to fill in the blanks without hand holding. Again, I've had that discussion with you before. And I think that's important in movies, to leave that question of why with the audience and let them fill in the blanks after it's done.
So yeah, there was a sequel planned, and I've known about this for years, and I've tried to find any script pages or anything about it or any treatments, but essentially the original plan was, and Tim Burton was not involved, is that they wanted to do a Beetlejuice sequel that took place in Hawaii. So they wanted to go for the camp factor, and so glad they didn't. But who knows? Maybe this sequel we're getting is actually far campier than we're expecting. I don't know. Like I said, my fingers aren't crossed either. I have to say, like, my final statement on this movie, like I said, I don't know anyone that doesn't like this movie. And even on Letterboxd, even the people that give it 2 or 3 stars, if you go and look in their reviews, the things that they like about the movie are the things that we just mentioned. It's just not their kind of humor. I also think that this is a movie that's more for Gen Xers and maybe, early millennials. there is not enough, I'm going to say violence, sex, and zaniness for like the Gen Z crowd or younger. They might get a kick out of it. They might like it because it's Tim Burton. But at the same time, this is a Tim Burton that we grew up with. It is not the Tim Burton that the newer generations have grown up with. It's a very different style. It's a very different aesthetic, and it's it's not as safe as the Tim Burton movies that we've had in the last 15 years have been. So it might be the fact that this is an older person's style of Tim Burton that they like and that they're used to. It's the same way that like people who shit on Batman and Batman Returns because they were raised with the Nolan movies and they just seem cheesy, right? It's who's your Batman? It's the one you grew up with, essentially, is what I say.
The one thing I'm going to say, if you watch it now with first time viewers, I would say the one piece of appreciation that after rewatching it, I was thinking about it is the visuals are visuals of the 80s, but even now, they hold up to an extent. It still matches the tone of the movie. It adds to that discomfort of the movie. I'm still in awe of the visuals, especially when we get to the Beetlejuice and the set designs, on how well it is absolutely executed to the point that it might not stay current with CGI now, but it adds and it fits into the movie perfectly and it matches the art direction on it. And that's what I think really makes this movie really stand out still today on being timeless.
Well, yeah. And before we jump into the critics, there's something I got to say about that where it's like now I feel that CGI is trying to look like practical. Where before it was trying really hard to always look like it's the next best thing and everything's sleek and designed. But like even that last Ninja Turtles movie that came out like a year or two ago, it almost looks like claymation the way they do the animation style. Like you can tell that, just like we say in almost every episode, everything old is new again. Everything is being repurposed and recycled with modern technology. And does it work? Or is it just, cool to see it that they're paying like an homage to the stuff that we grew up with? I mean, there's the fact that there's so much stop motion in this movie. It's very Harryhausen-esque, and that's 100% intentional because Tim Burton is a Harryhausen fan. Yeah, you would see like that kind of stuff today where people would try and make something look like that because they remember how cool it seemed to us when we saw it for the first time and how grotesque it was, especially when Adam and Barbara changed their faces, right? That's another very classic scene. I mean, it's on the goddamn cover of the video, right? Like you see those faces peeking out the window. If you hadn't seen that movie, you're like, what are these things? And then you watch the movie, you're like, oh my God. Again, it just sticks with you. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. You're a huge fan. I don't think there's anything else to say other than let's hear what our critics thought about this movie. Hey, coffee lovers, Antonio and Justin of Back to the Balcony here, and we've got something special for you. If you're looking to start your day with the perfect boost, you need to try Bulletproof Coffee. This isn't your average cup of joe. It's packed with high-quality ingredients designed to fuel your body and mind. Whether you're powering through a workout, tackling a busy workday, or just need the extra edge, Bulletproof Coffee has got you covered. And guess what? We've teamed up with Bulletproof to give you an exclusive deal. Use code B2B, that's B, the number 2B, at checkout to save 20% on your order. That's right, 20% off just for being a loyal listener. So don't wait, head over to Bulletproof's website and experience the difference yourself. Your mornings will never be the same with Bulletproof Coffee. Thank you for listening, and now back to the show.
The most ambitious fantasy, horror, and comedy films ever made. But here's a case where a movie just tries too hard for its own good, overwhelming us with special effects to the point it becomes almost obnoxious. Beetlejuice is the story of a young couple who has fixed up a nice country home, but they die in a car accident. And when they return home, they discover that they're ghosts. Then the home is sold to an obnoxious couple from New York City, their daughter and their lousy decorator, and the ghosts try to scare them all away, but they can't be seen.
Okay, so the fact that he says that it's ambitious to the point where it's almost obnoxious is so insulting to me. Like, no, it's ambitious to the point of no one else was doing what they were doing in this movie. And one of the best parts of Pee-wee's Big Adventure is the dream hospital sequence with the bike and the surgeons. that was essentially the testing grounds for what the visual aesthetic of this movie was going to be, with the crazy hallways and the checkerboard floor patterns, and everything is asymmetrical. This whole movie is that. They just took that scene and did that. That is ambitious, that is daring, and the contrast between, the nice little farmhouse they live in into what the Deetzes turn it into. Like, the Deetzes essentially turn it into the afterlife. Nothing is symmetrical. It's all that crazy postmodern art nonsense. It creates that sense of tension in your environment, even though that's not the environment we're supposed to be afraid of. It's the afterlife. No one was doing that back then. So yes, it was ambitious, but obnoxious? That's the wrong word, Gene. I don't know what you were thinking about with that. And yeah, he just really starts off really rough for me.
Right when he says the word ambitious, I'm with you, because here's the deal. Beetlejuice isn't like a movie we saw so often in the 80s, like action movies or sci-fi movies, or even to an extent some of these horror movies, where it was quick cuts, it was move the story along to just get to point A to point B. That means the story really tried to rush itself. But the thing with this is it's not obnoxious because the characters are so subtle, and the editing and the pacing of the movie really takes its time to really go through the story. It really lets us discover these environments. So obnoxious, there's really nothing obnoxious about this movie that isn't intentional.
Yeah.
And that's where he just totally missed the mark on this. And there is nothing in the 80s that really screamed originality as this film. And if I was him in his shoes, I'd at least be standing from my seat and applauding that, because we didn't see anything like this in the 80s that was, again, this ambitious, like he said.
This is the thing that I was always wondering about, and we talked about this before in other episodes. Is this a kids movie or is this an adult movie? That's the hard part about this, right? Because there's so much for kids in it. There is so much things that kids will be fascinated by, but nowhere in the marketing does it say it's necessarily a kids movie. We're not seeing any kids in this movie. I mean, Lydia's 15? She's a teenager. But there is so much fantastical elements that kids would love it, and kids did watch it. Like, all of us kids in the 80s, we watched this movie as if it was a kids movie. Like, I hardly think that Goonies is really even a kids movie. There's danger, there's adventure, there's action, there's violence. There just happens to be kids in it. That was like the glory of the 80s, right? Is that they were making movies that everybody could watch and enjoy, but they fell under the guise of, oh, this is a kids movie. It's PG. It's got a lot of fantastical elements to it. It's got essentially a living cartoon. So maybe that's what he's thinking about when he's saying obnoxious. Like, maybe he just doesn't like movies like that. We've heard him say that he doesn't. And that's just the attitude that he brought to this review.
I think it's up for interpretation on this, because the one thing I respect about Tim Burton is, to me, Beetlejuice is a kids movie, and this is why. Is it challenges topics for kids to fill in the blanks. It challenges and pushes the limits of the death topic, the haunting topic. All of these sub-conflicts really test the imagination of kids, of curiosity. Everything that screams midnight movie or something that's kind of taboo for kids to watch. This is that. And we see that in future movies of Tim Burton. You look at Batman that came out a year later. That one really teeters on the topic of adult and kid. So, but the imagination of what he introduces to kids when it comes to subject matter is there without blood, guts, gore. It's all there for what kids really want to see subconsciously. And he attacks it with discomfort, but again, curiosity. So to me, Beetlejuice would be a kids movie because that's what kids seek out to find, and it addresses all these topics in an appropriate way, and at times a humorous way. Now, you take out the undead horror house and a couple of these other things, and that's questionable. That's more for the adults. But when it comes to the subject matter, I think this one was intended for a guilty, taboo viewing for kids.
No, I can definitely agree with that. He goes on.
What to do, how to get the new people to leave. As in Ghostbusters, they must call on outside help. In this case, a wacky alien character from the netherworld named Beetlejuice, played by Michael Keaton.
They just keep comparing sci-fi or action movies from the 80s to Ghostbusters or to E.T. Those two movies, anything that came out like the decade afterwards, they were always comparing to either E.T., oh, it's just the creature that everyone loves, or it's a Ghostbusters movie. No, that is not the case. Frighteners. They compared the Frighteners to Ghostbusters. The Frighteners is nothing like Ghostbusters. This is nothing like Ghostbusters. They're reaching out for a ghost to help them. How is that Ghostbusters? I guess he's trying to say that any paranormal comedy is a Ghostbusters ripoff.
You have a ghost in it, they're going to compare it to Ghostbusters. You see that with a lot of these
Right.
genres that they do. And this one, you're 100% right. This isn't anything like Ghostbusters. On this one is a reach to justify their ill feelings towards this movie. They needed something to compare it to, and there's nothing to compare it to. So they picked the closest thing they can think of that they actually hold to their hearts that they loved. And that's what's irritating about Gene's assessment of this, is because there is nothing like this. He said it's ambitious, and he's comparing it to a movie that's absolutely nothing in relation to this except that it has ghosts in it. So to me, this one shouldn't even be in the same print in a newspaper as Ghostbusters, because this stands on its own as it's almost its own genre of movie.
No, I agree 100%.
There's plenty more of Beetlejuice in this movie. The film was directed by Tim Burton, the same man who directed Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and you can't fault the inventive art direction or ambition in either film. But in Beetlejuice, it's just too much of a not very good thing. I really felt the Michael Keaton character detracted from a rather nice couple played by Geena Davis and Alec Baldwin, and so the very thing that I thought I would enjoy the most, the Ghostbuster, if you will, was the thing that I enjoyed the least.
So, like we've said already, they know to use Beetlejuice very sparingly in this film. 14 minutes of screen time, but the movie is named after him. It's really about Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis. Like, that is our main character. Those are the people whose journey we're following along with. But you're not going to call the movie Adam and Barbara, right? Adam and Barbara are just the people that are there that have to deal with being dead and stuck in this house for like 200 years while they're waiting for their case to be worked through to go to the afterlife. The bureaucratic part about death, I love. And there's a few movies in the 80s that did that I think are just like perfect. Heavenly Kids one, and the movie Just Like Heaven's another, where it's like the afterlife is bureaucratic and you have to like go through the motions to go upstairs. I love it when movies do that, and this does it. It just makes it a little bit more grotesque and a little bit more outlandish. Michael Keaton, this movie put him on the map in everyone's mind, in my opinion. He had already made some bangers. Mr. Mom was a banger. I love Gung Ho. Not a lot of people have seen Gung Ho, but I love Gung Ho. So he was already doing his shtick in the 80s. It was nothing new. But this let him be more outlandish. And without this, he does not become Batman. And then it just, I fear what Batman could have become. It was probably going to be somebody boring in that role. It could have been Alec Baldwin, who would have been very charming as Bruce Wayne, but not a good Batman, So this performance, the fact that he showed his comic chops behind a thick layer of makeup and really made the movie his own, that is exactly why Beetlejuice is so memorable. But he just wants to say that character was obnoxious and useless, and he couldn't wait for him to get off the screen.
Well, one of Michael Keaton's pieces of criteria for the new one is not giving too much, because too much of a good thing turns bad. And I love that concept, and fingers crossed again. But this one, I think, with Michael Keaton, this is the defining moment where it really did test his range to really be that outlandish character on what he can do, especially under all that makeup. And the character design on it and the portrayal is spot on. I don't think at any point it's too much. And I think with Gene's assessment of it, it's how fast he delivered his lines when he's on screen. When he's delivering it in a fast and obnoxious way, it's intentional, but we don't get too much. Maybe at one point what we have, other than the last 10 minutes of it, we get maybe 5-7 minutes of dialogue with Keaton, and then we move on. So it's not like he's dominating the screen the entire time. He's there to be intentionally obnoxious to kind of really paint that picture. They want the audience to feel this guy's a little nuts and a little crazy. And there's no better actor that does it than Keaton, because he has the look, and it shows it through all that makeup and prosthetics, that he has those amplified facial expressions, and he has that body movement. Is almost like a drunken ghoul on screen. And that's what makes this character so lovable, is that it's not too much. It's almost the cherry on top, perfect amount of screen time that they give him to really affect the audience, to show how obnoxious he is.
I'm with you on this one, and frankly, I walked into this movie knowing nothing about it. I didn't know it was going to be a Ghostbusters clone.
Right.
And I liked that relationship between Geena Davis and Alec Baldwin. I thought it was going to be a goofy, silly comedy about this young married couple trying to fix up this crummy house. Maybe kind of a money pit or something. I don't know what I was expecting. Then when all the supernatural stuff hit, I agreed with you. I was sitting looking at the set decorations and saying, gee, that's terrific. The special effects. Boy, they're well done, but so what? Because there's no comic energy behind it. And Beetlejuice is absolutely, I mean, you use the word obnoxious. That's what it is. It's not funny. It's just, there's that guy again. Let's get rid of him. Which is not what I expect to think about Michael Keaton.
No, if this were a comedy act, which is really what it is for about 40 minutes, you would walk out after 10 and say, who needs this? It's not funny.
Yeah, so I mean, Roger jumped in the same boat too. Like, they did not, like I said in a previous episode, they did not get on the fun bus. Like, this movie's a fun bus, and they chose not to get on it. So, yeah, obviously we disagree with that. Here's my thing with Roger, is I feel like Roger, with his track record, should have defended this movie. It feels like something he would have defended. I think, at the end of the day, he just didn't like Keaton, and he didn't like Beetlejuice, the character. And he let that sink the entire ship when there's so much good on the ship. I mean, neither of them talked about any of the supporting characters. They did not talk about Glenn Shaddix, who's essentially like the James Coco of his day. They did not talk about Catherine O'Hara, who gives just a groundbreaking performance for her, because this is the Catherine O'Hara that everyone is used to now because of like Schitt's Creek and, the Christopher Guest movies, where, a lot of us grew up with her being Kevin McAllister's mom, probably her most boring and normal role. This is the role that everyone really fell in love with her in. It's like, who is this crazy, goofy lady who can just scream and make us die laughing with that voice and those looks? They don't mention any of that. They really just focus on, okay, the positives, it looks great. The art design and set design and creativity is great, but boy, is Beetlejuice obnoxious. Boy, is this movie not funny. I feel like we are watching two different movies.
Let's look at the track record here, especially with Roger. How many times have we heard in a review that he loves the first 10, 15, 20 minutes of a review? And that's what he's expecting. He even said it in his review. He didn't know anything going into this movie, and he got a taste of what he liked and what he set his expectations to. And when it didn't meet that expectation of what he wanted, that's when he destroyed it. So he wanted, like he said, this money pit, this couple moving into this house with some hauntings, a lighthearted comedy, it sounds like. He wanted a rom-com of ghosts. That's not what this is. And the interpretation when it comes to Beetlejuice is, who knows? Who's to decide that it was intentionally supposed to be funny, or this movie is a comedy? Because this is one character that's, again, intentionally there to be obnoxious. You don't have Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis cracking jokes throughout the entire thing. They're facing death. And at that point, when you don't realize what this movie is about, which is the topic of death, then you need to change your perspective on how you're going to review this movie. Because, again, reviewing the movie is the filmmakers executing the vision to tell a story? The answer is yes in this movie, not what you thought it was going to be within the first 15, 20 minutes.
I think that they miss the point that there is a surrealism to this movie that makes it what it is. Yes, it's a comedy with horror elements, but the surrealism of the movie is very, in my opinion, like kind of French New Wave. Like, this feels like it could have been a Buñuel film, or it could have been a Godard film, but with a more visual flair and aesthetic. It really has so many surreal moments that it can be off-putting. And so if they walked in here just expecting a comedy, or, as Roger says, just another Ghostbusters clone, they missed all of the best elements that are in this movie. And I think the reason why is because they went in there looking for the funny. They went in there looking for the comedy that they've been accustomed to for the previous 10 years. Like I said, they weren't a huge fan of movies in the 80s, but then they missed out on the surreal things that Burton is doing with his camera, with his art, and what Elfman's doing with his music. Yeah, like they just really missed a lot of boats on this one.
And that's mainly because the expectation, right? So their expectations, this is where they really fault on that, is really going in with what they want. And that's what drives me nuts about some of these reviews. And again, especially with the Ghostbusters comparison, because that's the only thing they can go to compensate for their or justify their dislike for the film.
100%. So I can't give any good scores today on this one because it's not just me being subjective, dude. I love this movie, but like I said, don't know anybody that does not like this movie. Listeners, if there's someone out there that hates Beetlejuice, let us know. I'm not going to judge you. I'm just trying to prove a point that I have never met a person that doesn't like this movie. And I've spoken to a lot of people about movies. It just blows my mind that they both thumbs down this thing. So I'm going to give I'm going to give him a D. Because it's not just one of his run-of-the-mill I didn't watch the movie reviews where he just blows through it. He did kind of blow through certain elements of it. But again, like he says it's ambitious, and I think that is what ruined his expectations, is he let the ambitiousness of things he saw on screen outweigh all of the moments where the movie was not trying to be ambitious, where it was just trying to be a good movie, where it was just trying to get the script across and have good characters. He skipped past all of that. So I'm going to give him a D for that.
I think that's fair. And Roger, I'm going to be a little bit more critical of it when it comes to what I've done with him in the past, because even if we look at the written review of Roger, it almost reminded me of our first episode of Ninja Turtles, where he goes on just praising Bo Welch with the aesthetics. The environment looks good. It feels like a Ninja Turtles review where he'll nail that positive, but then he just goes on the dislikes and misses the entire point of the storytelling aspect, of the surprises, of everything that it includes. So again, this one is probably one of my least favorite that I think reviewed it the same as Ninja Turtles, which is sad, even though I love both of them. But I'm going to give him 1.5 stars on this one.
I think that's very fair. I mean, and here's the thing. It makes me wonder, like, were these guys just too old? Were they just too outdated and out of their element for this new wave of movies that was coming out? I want to say yes, but then we see them get reinvigorated in the 90s when, this independent cinema movement and Sundance movement came and gave us even weirder movies that they just went crazy for. So I don't know. Maybe it was like just something about the 80s had them down. Who knows? Maybe they didn't have enough cocaine in the 80s and they were just going to be pissed off that other people were doing all the cocaine and they weren't. I can't figure it out because they had very different opinions in the 90s. And we've done enough 90s movies to show that. And we got a lot more on our list that will, help win that argument for me. But it really doesn't make any sense to me that both of them hated this movie. I felt that this would have been a split decision.
This one is one of the more shocking ones that I think that we have covered on the show, because at some point, the creativity, the ambition, the score, the music, it's not just the aesthetics of it. It's the entire point that they missed on it. And that's what's the disappointing thing, that I really wish they would have gone back and revisited this movie to really appreciate some of the things that they actually missed, because this one did stand apart from a lot of the junk that we saw in the 80s that tried to be ambitious but never really got there. And that's the disappointing factor of it. And they didn't even mention the Deo scene. How can you hate the Deo scene? It's one of the best timed scenes that actually has some fun factor, and then you have that final split second of a scare. It is the most well executed movie of its kind in just that one scene.
This is the movie that got me to be a Harry Belafonte fan. Like, I remember looking through my dad's albums for Harry Belafonte albums after this movie came out because I wanted to hear more of that calypso music. It really kind of like reinvigorated that genre, and I remember there being like a music video for Deo on MTV that was, Harry Belafonte inserted into the Beetlejuice movie, like music videos used to do back then. I mean, they went all out with how they marketed this, with how they made it accessible to all audiences, including the MTV crowd. Yeah, this movie was really made for everybody, and I thought it totally worked. I just don't know what they were thinking.
The only thing I'm going to say, if we don't in the sequel get a Deo or a Shake, Shake, Shake Sonora rendition, I'm going to be extremely pissed off.
Yeah, watch them have like fucking Fall Out Boy do it like they did with the Ghostbusters theme. Yeah, come on. Don't be that stupid, Warner Brothers. Anyway, okay, well, that was a great conversation on Beetlejuice. Next week, we are going to dive back into the supernatural, but in a different way. I'm bringing to the list Clint Eastwood's 1985 film Pale Rider, one of his latter-day westerns that was kind of like in his dark period before he came back with In the Line of Fire and Unforgiven. And I'm excited for this because I have not watched this movie in about 20 years after I did like a huge Western binge of Clint Eastwood movies like Hang 'em High and Joe Kidd and all those different movies. I remember liking this movie. I saw it in the theater with my parents. I've watched it once since then, and I want to watch it again because I don't like Clint Eastwood movies of like the last 10, 15 years. So I want to go backwards and find out what point in time did he lose me. And this is going to be like one of my first films on that list of, did he have it in the 80s or did he not?
This one's going to be a good conversation because one thing you should know about me is I'm extremely picky and critical on period pieces and Westerns. I'm not going to tell you even a hint of what I think of this film, but it's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the DVD's been on my shelf for like 20-something years, and I've only watched it once since I've had it, so it'll be a good revisit. So, like we always say, jump onto the socials, follow Back to the Balcony. You can follow my show, The Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast, on thecultworthy.com. You can follow Justin on The Movie Wire at
themoviewire.com.
Please reach out to us. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. And if you've got suggestions for films that Siskel and Ebert reviewed, put it in the box. We want to know about it. We've got 2 on the list so far. And we're almost at the point now where we're ready to start having guests. So if you are a podcaster and you like what we're doing and you like one of the concepts, reach out to one of us. See if we can get you on the show and have a 3-way conversation about what Siskel and Ebert were doing with the reviews and how they just have impacted the industry and the whole idea of cinematic critique up to this very day. And with that, Justin, I'm going to say farewell to you. Everyone, we'll see you next week.